This video is brought to you by slateblackindustries. For grip panels and other accessories, visit slateblackindustries.com. Nightforce. It's one of the premium optic brands available today, holding military contracts, a wide range of offerings, and, let's be honest, costing a pretty penny. Now, to kick off 2018, Nightforce updated its 1-4 LPVO by dropping 2 additional optics, the NX8 F1 and the Attacker 1-8, bypassing the 1-6 LPVO altogether. In today's video, we're going to be exploring the NX8 F1, the cheaper option of the two 1-8 power optics, at a cool $1,750. We'll come right out and say that the NX8 is an interesting optic. Unlike many low-power variable optics which try and achieve sufficient specs in all of the relevant categories which we're generally looking at, think of course about clarity, field of view, eye box, reticle, illum, weight, and so on, well, the NX8 is much more purpose-driven. The optic sells out on things like field of view and eye box in order to achieve the most minimal footprint possible. This isn't a formula we've seen readily executed by other brands or optics, and it places the NX8 in a very unique space. Let's talk first about the pros here. As previously mentioned, weight and overall size are probably the best of any LPVO out there in this magnification range. You're looking at a 17-ounce optic that is less than 9 inches in length. That means that when mounted, the optic is basically just the length of the upper receiver and not much longer than a red dot magnifier setup, and not all that much heavier depending on which dot and magnifier combo is being used. Then we get into the illumination, which the NX8 again puts up what is probably the gold standard for brightness. And yes, we're including the Swaro and 1-8 Attacker in this assessment. The dot brightness is right on par with an aimpoint, and unlike most LPVOs, doesn't even need to be run on max power to be easily daylight visible. This is very relevant when considering that the optic runs a first focal plane reticle, meaning it's quite small on 1 power, and the bright red dot with the black stadia draws the eye to the center of the optic extremely well, allowing for easy tracking of the reticle up close. From a control perspective, the illumination knob has off positions between settings, but does not lock. Next, we'll cover power adjustment, another category where the NX8 is simply the top of the line. The small power lever comes with the optic and can be removed if running super slick is the goal, but with the lever installed, the adjustment is like butter and can easily be flicked between 1 and 8 power with little to no effort. For an optic with a core function of being able to power up quickly to appropriately identify targets, this is a must, and the NX8 kills it in this department. Glass quality is very good. To us, it's on par with what we're seeing out of the likes of the Vortex Razor Gen 2 or other premium optics. Here is what you're going to see when looking at targets out to 500 yards. What you should also be noticing here, though, is that the center of the reticle starts to get pretty darn big in relation to the target as the range begins to extend. That's because not only is the donut going to obscure much of the target, the center dot is actually 1.25 MOA at 8 power, meaning that you're covering 5 to 6 inches of target with just the center dot when you get out to 400 and 500 yards. This is where we start to enter what we perceive to be as the weaknesses of the NX8. The reticle you're seeing here is the mil version of the reticle, which we certainly prefer as the MOA variant just seems to have too many subtensions. The T-shape feels good for close range, as previously mentioned, and despite the lack of win holds and the very thick center dot, as long as you know your mil holds out at range, the reticle works well enough as the lower stadia beneath the donut are not overly thick and allow for a decent sight picture when holding over. Except that the elevation adjustment for this optic is an exposed turret with a zero stop meant for dialing in 0.2 mil increments. So by using this feature, you're potentially setting the point of aim back behind the large, thick donut and dot at range. And even if you choose not to dial, it begs the question, why was this feature included with a reticle that frankly we just would never want to dial on from a functional perspective, especially given the likely use of this optic on a lightweight carbine. If there's something we aren't considering here, please let us know in the comments section, but when we add in the fact that the adjustment knobs are both capped on the 1-8 attacker, we really can't seem to make sense of this. Now, that aside, we need to address the field of view and eye box. This is where the user will certainly feel the effects of fitting a 1-8 power optic into such a small package. The field of view is, simply put, very tight, both on 1 power and 8 power. You're looking at 106 feet at 1 power and 13.2 feet at max power. Competitively, these are some of the worst stats for a premium LPVO in this category. In terms of eye box, things are very tight, especially at 8 power. If your head isn't perfectly positioned, you'll be seeing scope shadow. This also impedes the ability of the optic to be run up close if the mount is not perfect, and makes using the optic in unconventional positions a bit more difficult than some other options that make eye box a point of focus. It's also pertinent to add that when running this optic on a platform that recoils a bit heavier, such as a 308, unless the shooter's recoil control is on point, it would not be abnormal if the shooter were to see scope shadow at higher power magnification during the recoil sequence as the firearm moves and torques under the pressure of the discharge. That's just how tight the eye box feels. So then comes the ultimate question. Do the sacrifices and decisions that Nightforce has made make sense, and do the benefits outweigh the cons for the true intended use of this particular optic? Well, a lot of this comes down to what the specific end user is looking for in their purchase. If raw performance and DMR-like implementation is the goal, you'd likely be better served looking elsewhere. But if the end user's goal is to upgrade from a red dot with minimal impact to footprint and function, with the added ability to positively ID targets as the range begins to extend, well, then the NX8 F1 might be extremely attractive. We found this optic works very well as something being set up for use on, say, a 12.5 or a 14.5 inch AR, and we've even used it to stretch a 10.5 out to 500 yards on our practical accuracy course. The key here is understanding what the optic excels at and leveraging those points to your advantage. Aside from the quirky reticle elevation turret adjustment combo, we're really just talking about an extreme example of the trade-offs that optics make. So, we hope that you enjoyed our take on the Nightforce NX8 F1, and until next time, we'll see you on the range.
716, this is 096, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green, how copy, over?
096, this is 716, roger, over. 16, 091, 1 pack, green, green, over. This is 716, roger, over.
16, 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Redcon 1, over.